talk about criminal history checks, but such is the life we live. Okay, so I'm going to preface this discussion about criminal history checks with saying that the commission does not do criminal history checks. We do not go into TruScreen and field print and run any checks. So any information that we're getting, a lot of this is from the litmus. So you've probably seen it before if you've taken it. If you haven't taken it yet, you will. And so I'm not going to talk about how to run checks. And I'll show you resources about where you can see to do that and the process. But we're going to talk about just some complications that might come up, some basic factors, what we expect in Virginia, etc. There will be parts where, feel free to interrupt me, ask questions, give tips. I will also say that planning grants do not have to do criminal history checks. They don't have what's called covered staff, and they don't have members. All other operational grants have covered staff. I don't necessarily cover that in here, but covered staff is anybody who is drawing part of their salary or their benefits from your grant. So if you have those folks, I would recommend you go back to your AmeriCorps application and determine if you have covered individuals. They have to have a criminal history check before you can start. They say start work, but really before if they've worked in your organization before they can start work on the grant. So let me get started. Here's our agenda for today. I'm just going to do a brief intro into criminal history checks. We're going to talk about the Virginia requirements, so what we're expecting from you guys before the start of the program year. Talk about the policy. So what does your policy look like? Talk about training opportunities. Everyone needs a refresher. That's my sentiment about training. It's really important every year that you just re-up in your training on how to do these checks. Even if you've done them 1,000 times, you might see something that you've missed before. And then some common pitfalls that we see at the monitoring stage, and we'll talk about monitoring tomorrow. And then everyone's favorite topic, disallowances. So real briefly, the National Service Criminal History Check is a screening procedure. It's mandated by law in order to protect your beneficiaries. It's gone through different iterations over the past, since 2007 when it was a regulation, and they started putting out manuals on how to do checks. We've done it. Anybody who's been in national service for the past 10 years, we've done it in a whole bunch of different ways. But luckily, the agency has made it simpler, quote unquote, for us, and we use 2 approved vendors, TruScreen and FieldPrint. So the laws and requirements you'll see here, these are hyperlinked. So once this presentation goes out, if you want to read the CFR, feel free to do it. If you want to read the grant terms and conditions, they're not hyperlinked here, but they are on the AmeriCorps website and on Basecamp, and so you can find the regulations that guide us when we talk about criminal history checks. So understanding what the rule is, there are 3 different checks that you have to do from that. You'll see it from AmeriCorps approved vendors. We talk about FieldPrint and TruScreen. We'll talk about this forever. So a name-based National Sex Offender Public Website check, and we use TruScreen for that. So a name-based check, a name or fingerprint-based date of service resident check, and we use TruScreen doesn't report Virginia. So we use the FBI check to cover that second requirement, and then a fingerprint-based FBI check. So through an AmeriCorps identified state repository. So previously we've gone through different states, but now simplified it, just go through FieldPrint. So these are the 3 that are required, but if you just keep it in your mind, I have to do TruScreen and I have to do FieldPrint. Simple as that. Somebody asked yesterday if they have a candidate who's going to start in January and they want to run a criminal history check at the beginning of their program. Our rule of thumb is this is a rule, but if you have a break in service or work of 180 days, you have to do another check. So if someone ends, in March and they come back to your program in October, you have to do another check because 180 days have lapsed. So that's kind of our rule of thumb when we talk about doing checks beforehand. So if someone's starting January 1st, you wouldn't want to do a check 180 days or 181 days before their start date. Timing is critical. There used to be all these different iterations about when you could do it, but they've made it simplified. You have to do it before they start work, or service. So every single check has to be complete before they start. Before you can enroll a member or before you can bill any time to the grant, you have to have all of these things completed. So that means that everything is scheduled, everything is, comes back from the vendor, passed or cleared, and then you, as the grantee, whoever's in charge of it, has adjudicated it. So unless that adjudication is done, no one should be billing their grant, for any staff work, and members should not be accruing hours. So there's different elements, and if you talk to me any length about criminal history checks, I talk about you can't print out the results. We don't print out TruScreen. We don't print out field print, because you're not going to print out when you obtain consent, your adjudication. There's just different pieces that we have to. So we keep it all on field print, all on TruScreen. Just gonna keep on saying that. So there's also, we talk about eligibility, so getting those done, cleared, adjudicated. We also talk about ineligibility. So if someone's ineligible to work or serve in AmeriCorps, if they refuse to go under a criminal history check, if they're like, nah, that's not for me, it's like, unfortunately, you can't serve, or you can't be billed to the grant. And even if they say, we do, like here at DSS, we do TruScreen and field print, but in order to be billed to our VISTA grant, I had to do an additional one through the CNCS contracts. So if they're a national service criminal history check is different than a background check. They have different criteria for passing. So if they make false statements in connection with their national service criminal history check, there's a part on some of the forms where it says, do you have any past criminal history? And if they say no, and it comes back that they're not cleared or that they need to be challenging the results and they've made some sort of false statement, they're ineligible to serve. They're registered or required to be registered on a sex offender registry, and then they've been convicted of murder. Those are the two huge, crimes that make a member automatically ineligible to serve, or, your staff. So if your staff is a sex offender, I can't imagine a world in which staff is, but if they are and they can't pass a national service criminal history check, they can't be billed to the grant. So we won't go into this, but if TruScreen and field print, if they say this person is not cleared or they haven't passed our check, that doesn't necessarily mean they're ineligible to serve. It just means you have to challenge those results because they're not giving you the rap sheet. They're just giving you a recommendation of pass or not passed. So we give everyone the opportunity to get the rap sheet and prove to us that they haven't been convicted of a murder and they're not a sex offender. So just keeping that in mind. I'm not sure if anyone's ever been through that process. Looking at you, Audia. Have you been through that process where someone had to challenge a result, or has anybody on this call ever been through that?
So far, our Daring River Year program has not, but I am aware of the guidelines and how to challenge within the system. So that's just a plus.
Yeah. Great. Anybody, actually, let me just stop real quick. Has anyone ever gotten a not cleared result and had to have a member challenge the results? Paul?
Yes, I have.
So, do you remember what happened? Oh, a couple times. Okay. Do you remember what happened?
Yeah, so we had to have them go to another portal within FieldPrint, and I guess we had to pay a different amount. They had to go through that whole process, and they were found to be okay. So based on the city's HR policies and based on what we found by way of that second check, they were still cleared to serve.
Perfect. Great. And we'll get into that HR part about what additional checks or additional things that your organization may or may not accept as part of someone's eligibility to work or serve your organization. I will say that sometimes you'll get a not cleared back because it depends on whether or not the charge is categorized as maybe a violent crime, and so it may fall under the murder category where they haven't actually committed a murder, but it might be violent in so much as it could be considered murder. So they'll give you a recommendation and like, hey, we're not sure, you're gonna have to review this person. And then they'll go into field print and they'll get the actual rap sheet, which gives you every single charge. And then you'll have to look at it and keep that documentation that you determined, like you, the physical person at the organization, determined that they're cleared.
Hey, Samantha,
So-
I see
oh,
a
go
couple
ahead.
of comments and questions in the chat. Do you
Oh
want
yeah,
those now?
please. Yeah.
So I see from Kelly, to clarify, we should keep all the documentation for the checks in field print and TrueScreen, and it's not necessary to print them out anymore. Is that correct?
100%. Yes.
Okay,
1,000,
great.
1,100%. Yes.
Do not print them. And then Dana's just saying it would be helpful to get the rap sheet in cases of other charges that might not be desirable for service with vulnerable populations. So just adding in that, you know, it's good to get that information depending on who your members are working with.
So we can talk about that too when we talk about the policy. So I believe, and we can check into this too, if they come back with, if the member doesn't have to challenge it, this is a specific contract with CNCS. So you can do field print and TrueScreen and background checks outside of these two systems. And you can get a rap sheet and talk about what is or not acceptable at your organization. And so feel free to do that 100%. Like if your organization, you know, if you need to run a CPS check or you want to know if they have charges, like run that outside of this. I don't think that you can do that unless you, in this particular contract with CNCS, unless you need to challenge it. But feel free to do that outside of, you know, these two systems. And we'll talk about that in a minute.
Perfect.
Oh, go ahead. Is there another one?
I think that is it.
So here is how to document your compliance with the criminal history check requirements. So we want to see evidence of an adopted criminal history check policy, which we'll talk in a minute. We have a template for that we update every year, including sources used for the NSCHC search, state and national or state and FBI checks. We use TrueScreen and field print. It used to be you have to go to the National Service public website, make sure every single state was reporting, print it out, sign, date it, and half the time Washington, D.C. wasn't reporting. So you had to go back. But now we're just using TrueScreen and field print, so that's within the policy. Evidence of an annual criminal history check e-course training and litmus. So we push that every year. You have to do it once a calendar year. I don't think you can take it again unless your calendar year is up. But every year we just want to make sure that at least one person, if not two, at your organization who's running the checks has that on file with the commission. It's not, talked to a program yesterday, it's not mandatory to have that on file before you run the checks. Like you're not necessarily out of compliance, but we just need proof before your program starts that you've taken the litmus. So all required components is also how you document or complete it and adjudicate it no later than the day before the start of service or work. And that is documented within TrueScreen and field print. I'll show you towards the end what it can look like when you run a report. All required components from approved sources, which it will be because everyone will sign up if you haven't already for an account. And then documentation that individual is eligible if the vendor returned a do not recommend result. So if they are not cleared or they don't recommend it, then they're challenging it. Here are some fraudulent practices. I haven't seen this in a long time. I think it's probably more difficult with TrueScreen and field print to be fraudulent. But if you're adding backdated adjudication after we've noted that it's missing, or if you're adding past dates to documents after we've noticed that the dates were missing. So if you're printing things out and then writing a back date or crossing something out, it could be considered fraud. And then we would have to report you to the OIG. Grantee staff signing TrueScreen field print consent forms on behalf of the applicant. That's a big old no. Changing a staff's reported start date to appear on time. Fabricating NSCHC results, we don't do that because we use TrueScreen. Fabricating receipts for criminal history checks to hide fact that applicants were required to bear the cost. I don't think anybody here makes sure members do the cost and get reimbursed. I used to do that a long time ago, not recommended. Not reporting an ineligible individual. So if AmeriCorps is made aware of an eligible individual that the recipient failed to report, AmeriCorps may place the grant's funding on manual hold and or take additional action. So if you're letting someone serve who is deemed ineligible to serve, that's a big old no, and that's a huge disallowance. So these are the requirements for Virginia, just all summed up. You have to take the litmus course each calendar year, so send that to your program officer. We'll talk about the policy in a minute. So we have a template that we've gotten from the AmeriCorps website, and we've just made it our own. We put, Virginia logo on it. And so each year, you'll want to update that based on, sometimes your staff overturn, the person's not there anymore, or your organization has determined X offense will be longer, acceptable for individual to work or serve there. So we just want that updated every year. Read the manual. I know it's a lot of reading, and there's tons of them. There's, how to use field print, how to use TrueScreen, National Service Criminal History Check, the new rule. There's like 4 or 5 manuals, but if you skim them or piece by piece, you'll just be more informed. And I think that you'll feel more empowered to run these checks and feel confident that you're doing them right. Run the checks. Goes without saying. And then run any additional checks that your organization requires outside of this National Service Criminal History Check, like I'm saying. Not the same as a background check. So your organization might run a credit check, might want to see a rap sheet, might do some other things that AmeriCorps doesn't require. So you can have above and beyond requirements. They just need to be documented. And then always remember to adjudicate. I think I showed everyone my adjudicate tattoo that I got in West Virginia at the National Service Conference. It's just so important. It's just so important. Let's move on. Anybody have any words of wisdom about adjudication, or I don't know, anything about the process that you find has been difficult or a learning curve, or I don't know, any comments about National Service Criminal History Check so far?
Hi, Samantha.
Hey, Audia.
All right, so for the better of the group, although we do not print the results anymore, just so that I could sleep at night, I still adjudicate the receipts. So I just print off the receipt that it's been done, and I just sign and date that for our file. So I think that's the best practice if anyone in the group would like to still have something on paper without printing, the actual results.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I think that some other folks have keep spreadsheets too of when. Now that's difficult because I've seen spreadsheets before where I'm like, is this an adjudication outside of the system? And you can change spreadsheets, but if you want to have your own tracking mechanism to make sure that you're doing X, Y, and Z and ABC and making sure that all the steps are followed, I would definitely do that. And there's a case to be made that if you're tracking it that way and maybe signing off on it, or somebody else is signing off behind you, that if you miss a step, we might be able to count that. No promises. So your policy, so keep it updated. Organizational staff involved in your criminal history check. So you'll see it's just a little snippet, a little picture, an introduction about why we do criminal history checks, the organizational staff involved in doing it. So if we come out to monitor or during the year, we're like, okay, we did a spot check. So who's involved? Like, tell me your separation of duties. Who's actually running the checks? Who's adjudicating them? Who's guiding members through the system? Because they have to, I believe, in field print, make their own appointment to go to a live scan. So just making sure that you're following up with members to do that as well. So your program may insert any other criteria the program has. So example, an individual who has any arrests or convictions related to domestic violence. If that's not the type of member that you want to serve in your program, you can certainly say that. It just needs to be in your policy. We just need to document that. Name-based checks. This one's a hot button issue over the past couple of years. It used to be government issued photo ID, but that has kind of gone by the wayside, and organizations need to determine how you determine the legal name. So is it the name on the application? Is it the name on their passport? Is the name on the license? And so when we do monitoring, we just want to see, okay, what's your policy? And then can I draw a linear line to how you did a name-based check based on your policy about how you determine what their legal name was? Does that make sense? Good, great. And then additional requirements, procedures. What other checks do you do? We just want to know. So submit to your program officer by the start date of your program. We'll get those templates out to you. I think there's one on Basecamp, but we'll just make sure it's updated. So just, okay, let's keep moving. So training on Litmus. If you want to see, if you don't have a Litmus account, it's very easy to sign up for one. That's also on Basecamp, the instructions to do that. And there's recordings on TrueScreen, recordings on FieldPrint, on how to run the checks. And so, even if you're just eating your lunch at your desk and you just want to watch the video, they're not terribly long. Some of them are terribly boring, but it's terribly important that you do it. So if you just want to watch the recordings, I think that'd be great. Here's how we check our own checks. We're talking about compliance here. This is TrueScreen. This is a shot of someone's TrueScreen result. So you'll see the name, phone number, requester, the date they request, and then they have a key here. So if it's in the review status, it's not complete. It needs to be passed, which is green. The vendor's manual, I think, is hyperlinked here. At the bottom, you can view the full report, and then you can see adjudicate this case. So that's just a screenshot of what it looks like, but here's a screenshot of what it looks like when it's compliant and not compliant. So if you view the report, you'll see that this one is missing grantee adjudication on the left, and then this one on the right has it's passed, and then added some case notes. Does this look familiar to everybody or people who run checks? Oh yeah, I see you shaking your head, so that's great. I mean, it's really as simple as that. It can be difficult when you're in the throes of things and you're doing recruitment, and then you're working with staff on X, Y, or Z, or doing supervisory training to remember this step. But I would, maybe do a calendar reminder, do your own tracking mechanism to make sure that you're adjudicating when you get the results back. And you might get results back at different times. I don't know the longest I've ever seen it come back, but I think they say TrueScreen takes maybe 2 to 3 days, and FieldPrint maybe up to 5 days. And anybody's results can come back at any time. There's no rhyme or reason. So just keeping that in the back of your mind, that and you can run reports, and we'll look at that. This is the report that's available to you in My Tools. I don't know if anyone's ever used this before, or if you have or have not seen that, but this is from Litmus, so it should be there. And this is an example. So when you click on that report, it's going to ask you what date range you want. And so if I'm doing a monitoring, we've mapped all of your organizations to our monitoring account. I'll click Literacy Lab, or I'll click all sub-grantees, and then I'll look, okay, if their program starts September 1st, they're probably doing criminal history checks probably in July or August. So I'll do it July 1, and then I'll do it through the date of today. And then I'll run the report and I'll look at it, and you'll see different examples here. So 1 and 2, Mickey volunteer and Doug volunteer. The last column, you can see in the third to last column, it's still in the review and there's no adjudication. So it's going to be blank. I mean, it's really easy if you're looking at a spreadsheet to see that this column is blank or missing names, and then it's in review status, and you can obviously sort it. So you'll see who's passed and who's not adjudicated. So number 3, Wally supervisor, they got a state check and then a NSCHC, which everyone needs, and their recommendation is passed, and then the grantee adjudicated it. This is a perfect check. And then number 4, Michael volunteer, TrueScreen recommendation is a review, but based on, I guess, whatever outside information or rap sheet that you have, you've determined that you're going to pass this member and you're going to say that they are eligible to serve. So then we just need additional documentation on file that how you made the determination, that final adjudication determination. Has anyone seen this report? People who run checks. Andrea, do you run checks? No? Okay. Who runs checks on here? Paul, have you run your own report? Not there. Claudia, do you run your own reports?
Well, I was going to say this is very helpful because I do this outside of the system, just with my own spreadsheet, especially since we have to put in that clear date and e-grants before they start. So yeah. I think moving forward for our new service year, I will use this because it's already there and I'm not duplicating the steps. So thank you.
And sorry, Samantha, I had to step out for a couple of minutes, so
It's okay.
I just
You're
heard you
very
ask,
important.
I heard you say, Paul, are you paying for lunch for the whole group? What did you say? Ask.
At the hot dog stand. Do you ever run a report in TrueScreen? And there's one in FieldPrint as well that gives you all the information. So if you'll run it from like September 1st to the current date, it'll tell you, it'll come up like this. And it'll say all of your members, what checks you did, what the recommendation
Actually, no.
from. Okay. Okay.
It looks
Is
nice though.
Yeah, yeah. This is what I mean, this is what we use when we monitor. So Litmus is saying it's available to everybody. So I would
Excellent.
recommend that you go see that for yourself.
Cool.
Oh, what
Thanks.
Christy's on here, isn't she? From Aspire?
Christy said in the chat, yes, that she does run this report and has her own checklist.
Actually, no, I've never run this report before. I didn't know it existed. I just make my own spreadsheet every year. Can you remind me where we find this again? Like how we get to it? Litmus. Okay, thank you.
So this is in TrueScreen.
Oh, TrueScreen. Okay, right. Yes.
So my tools and then the report. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. If you don't have the CNCS monitoring report available, I believe that we can create a report that'll stay within your account and then you can just run that report. But I recommend this for sure. FieldPrint, the same idea. Except the system obviously is set up a little bit differently. But there's a pass or fail for the grantee final adjudication. It used to, even last year, that you couldn't, or maybe 2 years ago, you couldn't adjudicate in the system. So people, like if I'm monitoring 2 years ago or even last year, I probably will find some field prints that have been printed out because you couldn't adjudicate in the system. But since January of 2 years ago almost, you can adjudicate in the system. That's why we don't want you to print anything out anymore. So same idea, you get the report back from FieldPrint, they give you they give you their recommendation on adjudication. And then you say, okay, this is great. Thank you so much, FieldPrint. We're so glad we paid you $28 to run this check. And then you're going to pass them or fail them, depending on the recommendation and any information that you have outside of the system. Review your check, all covered staff have checks. You've billed, so FieldPrint and maybe my subject matter experts on the call can help me out with this. There's two places you have to look. That you have to look at what my fitness determination and then my fingerprints. So my fitness determination is where you see FieldPrint's recommendation on cleared or not cleared, and then my fingerprints is where you go to adjudicate. This is what it looks like when it's done in the My Fitness determination. So the order information. So there at the bottom you see cleared. So that's their recommendation. And then at the top you'll see that this person, this organization cleared them, and you'll see the date, who made the determination. So that's super important. What staff adjudicated and what date was adjudicated, because I need to see that the adjudication date, the grantee adjudication decision made date is before, and up to the day before that member. If I run a roster report in eGrants and I see what their start date is, not their enrollment date, their actual start date needs to be after that adjudication date. And then a TCN status report is the equivalent of the TrueScreen monitoring report. Same thing, find it in My Tools. Ta-da! And it does the exact same thing. So it tells you where your members are, or excuse me, your member name, the date completed, the whole thing completed, the status was cleared or not cleared, when did you view the fitness determination, who did it, the grantee adjudication date, so did you pass or not pass them, and then the final adjudication date and by who. So this is what we do when we spot check. This is what we do when we monitor. We just say, hey, let me pull a roster from eGrants. Let me pull a report from FieldPrint or TrueScreen. Let me line up the names before, oh, after. Oh, that might be a disallowance. So, you know, it's as simple as that. Non-compliance. Oh, it's the worst, man. So missing checks. Document state of residence and application. That should also be in your policy, and you'll see that when you read it. There are a couple of rules about state of residence. So if they're applying, you have to determine what their state of residence is at the time of application, and that will determine if in TrueScreen if you need to run a state of residence check or not. And we can talk more about that offline. Missing adjudication. So if you don't adjudicate, you're going to be non-compliant. It's just end, period, dot, comma, done. Missing documentation, individuals eligible if vendor provide adverse recommendations. So if they don't challenge it, you need to keep everything. Just keep everything. Just keep everything. Christy?
Hey, just quickly, going back to
Yes.
the screen, I logged in. Our screen does not look the same as yours. So if you go to reporting, there's a graph, scroll down, and there's 2 reports we can run. So if anybody's like, ours looks different and I can't find it, which was me initially, just FYI.
Quick question, quick follow-up. Are one of the 2 reports like a search report that you can?
One is CNCS monitoring report and the other one is a credit card receipt report.
Perfect. That's it. The CNCS monitoring one. Thank you. And these are screenshots taken from CNCS level folks. So unfortunately, they didn't think that far ahead. So the CNCS monitoring report is the one that you'll want to pull for TrueScreen. Thank you, Christy. I appreciate that. Late adjudication on or after the start. It can't be on. You'll just have to enroll them the day after. It's just like, that's just what the rule is. NSCHC search missing jurisdictions. We don't do that anymore. We use TrueScreen. First and last names on name-based check does not match individual's name documentation. We talked a little bit about that. If you're running a name-based check, the name has to be spelled correctly. Like, it just won't work if you spell the name wrong. And then no notice provided that the selection is contingent upon the organization's review. That's housed within TrueScreen and Fingerprint. They sign a document or they like e-sign it. So that's all held. We don't print anything out. It's all held in those 2 systems. Unfortunately, when we find that these rules have not been followed, we have a disallowance. And so if we have an ineligible individual, all costs associated with that member or that person are disallowed. If we find that you ran a check but the member was eligible, we do a cost-based disallowance for up to 6 months. I'm not sure, based off my memory, who has or hasn't had a disallowance. Previously, we were able to offset costs and claim different costs, and people haven't necessarily had to pay cash money back. But the agency has just put down guidance to be more specific that it has to be paid back to the Treasury. So we're not going to reimburse costs if we find you're disallowed, or you're going to pay back money to the Treasury. And we do this whole process where we document how much living allowance did you pay the member over what period of time. And then we send it up to, who do we send it to? The Office of Monitoring at CNCS. And they go through a whole process. It's just so much paperwork. It's crazy. So we really don't want that to happen. And unfortunately, what I'll talk about in a minute, I mean, fortunately, but we monitor the year before. So sometimes the prime is closed out at a certain time, and we'll talk about that when we talk about programmatic monitoring tomorrow. Sometimes we don't see things until a year after, and there's nothing that we can do. So then it's like, our hands are really tied and we have to disallow up to 6 months. We'll never disallow a whole year unless that person was found ineligible to serve. But if they're eligible to serve, 6 months of living allowances, especially if it's a full-time member plus FICA, that's a huge amount of money, huge. And I can't stress how debilitating that could be to an organization. So just keep that in mind. So what can you do to mitigate non-compliance? Follow your policy, read the manual, do the training, follow it with questions. Always go to your program officer if you have a question. We do have access, like I said, to a monitoring account. So we can't do it for 300 members, but we are gonna start doing more spot checks. But really your organization is signing the contract, right? Like it's your responsibility to be running the checks compliantly. So run a report in TrueScreen and Fingerprint over the period of enrollment. Have a process and procedure. That's really what a policy is for, right? To say, here's how we're going to do it. Here's our policy. And then maybe have 2-person systems. It's hard for one person to just be responsible for this heavy of a load, especially when there's this many potential disallowances. So maybe one person runs checks, one person runs a report, or one person adjudicates, and then the other person runs a report. I would just recommend running the report. And then what's the commission doing? Hopefully being, providing you resources and tools in order, and just like talking about how important it is. This is like one of the heaviest topics when it comes to AmeriCorps is the National Service Criminal History Check. And it's not fun, but it's really super important. So we're here to answer any questions. No questions going to go unanswered about criminal history checks. Obviously, Sasha and Kim, you can go to them immediately. If they don't know the answer, they'll come to me. If I don't know the answer, we'll find it. We'll find it in a timely way because it's just so important. Provide guidance if you're confused or if you don't know what to do. If you're just like, oh my God, what? like, okay, where are you in the process? Have you signed up for a TrueSkin account? Let's start there. And then we're going to start doing more standard spot checks throughout the year on the back end during heavy enrollment periods. We're going to start doing spot check reporting in September and October, probably the end of December, and then January. Probably next May as well, because some people have summer programs. And a spot check is basically we're running a report and then we're seeing if there's any blanks in the adjudication column. And then we can make sure that your program's up to date. But you should have ran that report already by the time that we make you aware that you haven't adjudicated something. And then here's just some guidance that I took a screenshot of on the AmeriCorps website. It's like a ridiculous amount of guidance, and it's hard to get through. And I understand that it's very heavy reading, and that's why you have a program officer to help you get through all this as well. So like Annalise said, we're partners in this, and it looks bad on all of us when we have to give money back. I'm just saying that like straight out. We don't want to give money back to the Treasury. We don't want to do it. So let's just not do it. Let's just do our checks. Anybody have any questions? Comments, concerns?
I see in the chat, Michelle said that she was able to find both reports. So it looks like those are nice and available.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle, for confirming.
And then Victoria just made the point that sometimes when you receive the results, it'll say it's a success and it looks like, everything has gone through clearly, and you just need to remember that you still have to adjudicate after you get the results back saying that they're clear.
I really appreciate that. Really, really do. Great tip. Always run that report. And I, like the commission's doing where we're like putting on our calendar, okay, January 31st, September 31st, we run a report. October 15th, we run a report. Just doing spot checks. I mean, it literally takes 2 seconds to run a report. And then you can keep that report as if anything funky happens in the system, you have the report that you already ran that you saved and you could potentially send as backup documentation as well. Just always thinking ahead. But that's it for me. I didn't mean to bring everybody down. Try to infuse some light.
Just a tip too, pay very special attention to exactly how it's spelled on their whatever photo ID that you're using or something for real or perceived spaces or commas or periods and stuff like that. Very special attention.
I was just telling somebody about that yesterday about perceived spaces. That's a great, great, great tip. All right, I'll pass it back to Kim then. Thank you guys. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, great, Samantha. So I guess we'll go ahead.